Captain Sarah Mitchell stepped out of her silver sedan and onto the scorching tarmac of Edwards Air Force Base. The California desert heat hit her like a wall, but she barely noticed. Her eyes were fixed on the massive hangar ahead, where her future waited. At 28, she had already proven herself as one of the Air Force's most skilled test pilots, but today would be different. Today would either make her career or destroy it completely. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks ago, stamped with classifications she'd never seen before. Project designation, classified. Mission parameters, classified. Aircraft type, classified. The only thing that wasn't classified was her reporting time, and the knowledge that this assignment could change everything she thought she knew about aviation. As Sarah walked toward the security checkpoint, she noticed other pilots arriving. Captain Jake Reynolds stepped out of a red sports car, his flight suit perfectly pressed and his confidence radiating like heat from the asphalt. He'd been her competitor since flight school, always one step ahead in promotions and always ready, with a smirk when she struggled with the politics of military aviation. Behind him came Major Tom Harrison, a veteran with more flight hours than most pilots dreamed of accumulating in a lifetime. The security process was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. Multiple ID checks, retinal scans, and forms that required her to acknowledge penalties for disclosure that included decades in military prison. Whatever waited inside that hangar was worth protecting at the highest levels of national security. When the massive doors finally opened, Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat. The hangar stretched out like an aircraft cathedral, but it was nearly empty except for a single aircraft sitting under bright lights in the center. The machine before them looked like nothing she'd ever seen in any manual or briefing. Its lines were aggressive and alien, with surfaces that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The craft appeared to shimmer slightly, as if it existed somewhere between solid matter and something else entirely. "Welcome to Project Phantom," announced Colonel Martinez, a stern woman with gray-streaked hair and eyes that had seen more classified operations than most people could imagine. "What you're looking at represents 15 years of development and more taxpayer dollars than some small countries spend on defense. This aircraft doesn't officially exist, and after today, you'll understand why." Sarah studied the machine more carefully. Its proportions were wrong by conventional standards, too sleek in some places, too angular in others. The cockpit was barely visible, integrated so seamlessly into the fuselage that it seemed more grown than built. No visible weapon systems, no obvious engine intakes, and landing gear that looked like it belonged on a spacecraft rather than an aircraft. Jake snorted softly beside her. "Looks like someone took a stealth fighter and crossed it with a UFO." "Hoax," he whispered to Tom, loud enough for others to hear. Several pilots chuckled, the tension of the moment needing some release. Sarah remained silent, but something about the aircraft called to her in a way she couldn't explain. Colonel Martinez continued the briefing, explaining that they would be evaluating pilot candidates for a program that pushed the boundaries of human flight capability. The aircraft incorporated technologies that challenged conventional understanding of aerodynamics, propulsion, and materials science. Each pilot would have one opportunity to demonstrate their compatibility with the system. Success meant joining the most advanced aviation program in human history. Failure meant returning to conventional assignments with memories that could never be shared. As the technical briefing continued, Sarah learned that the aircraft's designation was classified, but the development team had given it the unofficial nickname Ghosthawk for its ability to appear and disappear from radar screens in ways that defied current stealth technology. The propulsion system was unlike anything in the current military inventory, capable of performance characteristics that sounded more like science fiction than engineering reality. Jake raised his hand during the technical discussion. "Ma'am, with respect, this thing looks like it was designed by a committee of people who never actually flew aircraft. How do we know it's even airworthy?" His question drew murmurs of agreement from several other pilots. Colonel Martinez smiled coldly. "That's exactly the kind of thinking that will wash you out of this program, Captain Reynolds. The aircraft has been thoroughly tested by our best pilots and has performance characteristics that exceed anything currently in service. Your job isn't to question the engineering. Your job is to prove you can handle capabilities beyond your current understanding. Sarah felt a chill of excitement mixed with fear. Everything about this situation suggested they were being offered access to technology that represented a fundamental leap forward in aviation. The secrecy, the exotic appearance of the aircraft, and the careful selection of pilots all pointed to something extraordinary. But extraordinary often came with extraordinary risks. The briefing concluded with individual flight schedules. Each pilot would have 2 hours of simulator time followed by a supervised flight evaluation. Sarah was scheduled for the final slot of the day, which meant she would spend hours watching her competitors attempt to master whatever secrets the Ghosthawk contained. As they filed out of the briefing room, Jake caught up with Sarah in the corridor. "You're actually excited about this experimental nightmare, aren't you?" he asked, studying her face. "Mitchell, this thing probably can't even fly properly. They're using us as test subjects for some research project that's gone too far off the rails." Sarah looked back through the hangar windows at the mysterious aircraft. "Maybe," she said quietly. "Or maybe we're looking at the future of aviation, and most people just aren't ready to recognize it yet." The disagreement between them was nothing new, but something about the Ghosthawk made their different approaches to flying feel more significant than ever before. That evening, Sarah lay in her temporary quarters staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Tomorrow she would either prove herself worthy of piloting humanity's most advanced aircraft, or she would join the ranks of pilots who had been found inadequate for the future of flight. Either way, her life was about to change forever. The first day of evaluations began before dawn. Sarah arrived at the hangar to find other pilots already gathered around the coffee station, their conversations hushed and tense. The Ghosthawk sat in the same position, but now it seemed more imposing under the early morning lights. Ground crews moved around it with an almost reverent care, performing checks with equipment Sarah didn't recognize. Jake was the first pilot scheduled for simulator training. Sarah watched through the observation windows as he strapped into a cockpit mock-up that looked nothing like traditional aircraft controls. Instead of conventional instruments, the console featured smooth surfaces that glowed with soft blue light, responding to touch in ways that seemed more like interacting with a computer than controlling an aircraft. Within 20 minutes, Jake emerged from the simulator looking pale and frustrated. "The interface is completely backwards," he announced to the other pilots. "Nothing responds the way it should. The flight characteristics make no sense. They've built something that fights the pilot instead of working with them." Major Tom Harrison went next, his decades of experience evident in his methodical approach to learning the unfamiliar systems. But even he struggled with the unconventional controls. When he emerged after his session, he shook his head grimly. "I've flown everything from crop dusters to experimental jets," he told the group. "This isn't like anything in the inventory. The computer does too much thinking for the pilot." One by one, the other pilots completed their simulator sessions with similar results. Captain Lisa Wong, known for her precision flying, came out looking confused. "The aircraft wants to fly itself," she reported. "Every input I make gets filtered through systems I don't understand. It's like trying to drive a car that won't let you steer properly." Sarah watched her colleagues' reactions with growing concern. These were exceptional pilots, people who had mastered the most advanced aircraft in the military inventory. If they were struggling this badly with the simulator, what did that mean for her chances? But something nagged at her about their descriptions. They all seemed to be approaching the Ghosthawk as if it were a conventional aircraft that had been modified, rather than something designed from the ground up with different principles. When Sarah's turn came for simulator training, she approached the cockpit with a different mindset. Instead of trying to impose traditional flying techniques on the unfamiliar systems, she decided to let the aircraft teach her how it wanted to be flown. The moment she settled into the pilot seat, she felt something she'd never experienced before. The aircraft seemed to respond to her presence in subtle ways, displays brightening slightly, surfaces warming under her touch, systems coming online with an almost organic fluidity. The first few minutes were disorienting. The Ghosthawk's flight characteristics were unlike anything she'd ever experienced. Instead of the mechanical response of traditional aircraft, every input seemed to flow through sophisticated systems that interpreted her intentions and executed them in ways she hadn't expected. Rather than fighting this difference, Sarah found herself adapting to it, learning to communicate with the aircraft rather than simply commanding it. Chief Test Pilot Commander David Chen observed her session from the control booth. Unlike the other evaluation officers, he wasn't taking notes or checking boxes on evaluation forms. Instead, he watched Sarah's interaction with the aircraft with intense focus, as if he were seeing something he'd been hoping to find. When Sarah emerged from the simulator 2 hours later, she felt energized rather than frustrated. The other pilots looked at her expectantly, waiting for her to join their chorus of complaints about the impossible aircraft. Instead, she remained quiet, processing what she'd experienced. "Well?" Jake demanded. "Did you figure out how to make that computer nightmare behave like a real aircraft?" Sarah considered her answer carefully. "It's not supposed to behave like other aircraft," she said finally. "It's designed around completely different principles. Maybe we're approaching this wrong." Jake laughed harshly. "Mitchell, you're delusional if you think that thing is flyable. They've created an engineering disaster and they're trying to find pilots desperate enough to risk their lives testing it." But Commander Chen had approached their group during the conversation. "Captain Mitchell," he said quietly, "I'd like to speak with you privately." His tone suggested this wasn't a request. They walked to a small office adjacent to the hangar, where Chen closed the door and activated a white noise generator before speaking. "What did you experience in the simulator that the others missed?" he asked directly. Sarah hesitated, unsure how to articulate what she'd felt. "The aircraft has a kind of intelligence," she said carefully. "Not artificial intelligence exactly, but systems that anticipate and adapt. The other pilots were trying to override that capability instead of working with it." Chen nodded slowly. "The Ghosthawk incorporates neural interface technology," he explained. "It reads bioelectric signals from the pilot and integrates them with traditional flight controls. Most pilots find this deeply unsettling because it feels like the aircraft is reading their thoughts. They fight the system instead of learning to partner with it." The revelation sent a chill down Sarah's spine. Neural interface technology was theoretical, something discussed in classified research papers but never implemented in operational aircraft. If the Ghosthawk truly incorporated such systems, it represented a breakthrough that could revolutionize not just military aviation, but human interaction with machines. "How many pilots have successfully bonded with the aircraft?" Sarah asked. Chen's expression grew serious. "In 3 years of testing, only 2 pilots have demonstrated true compatibility with the Ghosthawk systems. Both are currently assigned to operations I can't discuss. We've evaluated over 40 candidates, including some of the best pilots in the world. The vast majority can't adapt to the neural interface, and those who can't adapt experience difficulties." "What kind of difficulties?" "Disorientation, anxiety, and in a few cases, temporary neurological effects. The aircraft systems are designed to integrate with human consciousness in ways we're still learning to understand. Pilots who fight the integration experience feedback that can be psychologically damaging." Sarah understood now why the other pilots had emerged from the simulator looking disturbed rather than simply frustrated. They hadn't just failed to master an unfamiliar aircraft. They'd experienced something that challenged their fundamental understanding of the relationship between human and machine. That evening, Sarah sat alone in the hangar after hours, studying the Ghosthawk in the dim security lighting. Tomorrow would bring her actual flight evaluation, and she now understood that she wasn't just being tested on her flying skills. She was being evaluated for her ability to merge her consciousness with an aircraft that challenged the basic assumptions about what it meant to be a pilot. The stakes had become much higher than career advancement. She was potentially being invited to participate in the evolution of human flight capability itself. The morning of the flight evaluations arrived with unusual weather. Desert storms had moved in overnight, bringing strong winds and scattered thunderheads that would challenge even experienced pilots in conventional aircraft. Sarah watched from the hangar windows as ground crews secured equipment against gusts that rattled the massive building. Perfect weather for washing out the last candidates, Jake muttered, checking his watch. He was scheduled for the first flight evaluation, and his nervousness showed despite his usual bravado. The other pilots clustered around weather reports, discussing wind conditions and visibility concerns with the focus of people whose lives would soon depend on atmospheric conditions. Colonel Martinez arrived with the morning briefing team, but her expression was more serious than usual. "The weather is marginal for normal flight operations," she announced, "but these evaluations will proceed as scheduled. The Ghosthawk is designed to operate in conditions that would ground conventional aircraft. Today's weather will actually provide a better test of both aircraft and pilot capabilities." Sarah felt a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. The simulator had given her confidence that she could work with the Ghosthawk's unique systems, but actual flight would introduce variables that no simulation could fully replicate. The neural interface technology would be processing not just her conscious decisions, but also the subconscious responses that came with real danger and real consequences. Jake's flight evaluation began with extensive pre-flight checks that took nearly an hour. The ground crews walked him through systems that seemed to defy conventional aircraft design. The Ghosthawk's engines, if they could be called engines, produced no visible exhaust and made sounds unlike any propulsion system Sarah had ever heard. Instead of the roar of jet engines, the aircraft generated a low harmonic hum that seemed to resonate through the ground itself. When Jake finally climbed into the cockpit, Sarah could see his tension from the observation deck. The aircraft's canopy was unlike traditional designs. Instead of simple transparency, it seemed to offer enhanced visual displays that overlaid information directly onto the pilot's field of view. Jake spent several minutes apparently struggling with system startup, his frustration visible even from a distance. The Ghosthawk's takeoff was unlike anything Sarah had witnessed. Instead of the thunderous acceleration of conventional military aircraft, it rose from the runway with an eerie smoothness that seemed to ignore the crosswinds buffeting other aircraft on the base. But within minutes of becoming airborne, something went wrong. Sarah watched through binoculars as the Ghosthawk began flying erratic patterns, its movements jerky and uncoordinated. The aircraft would smoothly execute one maneuver, then suddenly lurch into an unexpected attitude as if pilot and machine were fighting for control. Radio chatter from the control tower revealed Jake's increasing panic as he struggled with systems that weren't responding to his commands. "Ghosthawk Alpha, return to base immediately," came the urgent command from flight control. "You are cleared for emergency approach on runway 09. The landing was barely controlled. The Ghosthawk touched down hard, bounced twice, and came to a stop with emergency crews already racing toward it. When Jake finally emerged from the cockpit, he was pale and shaking, supported by ground personnel who helped him to the medical station. Later, Sarah learned that Jake had experienced what the flight surgeons called interface rejection. His nervous system had fought so aggressively against the neural connection that the feedback had caused temporary disorientation and nausea. He was medically grounded from the program and would return to conventional aircraft assignments with strict instructions never to discuss what he'd experienced. Major Tom Harrison's flight went better initially, but ended with similar results. His decades of flying experience actually worked against him, as his deeply ingrained responses conflicted with the Ghosthawk systems. Captain Lisa Wong lasted longer in the air, but ultimately experienced the same interface rejection that had affected the others. By the time Sarah's evaluation arrived in the late afternoon, 4 pilots had failed to successfully bond with the Ghosthawk's neural systems. The mood around the base was somber, with ground crews and evaluation officers showing the strain of watching experienced pilots struggle with aircraft systems that seemed designed to reject human control. "Commander," Chen approached Sarah as she completed her pre-flight preparations. "The neural interface responds to emotional state as much as conscious thought," he said quietly. "Fear, anger, and frustration create feedback loops that make the connection impossible. The pilots who've succeeded learn to approach the aircraft with openness rather than attempting to dominate it." Sarah nodded, understanding that she was receiving advice that went beyond technical flying skills. The Ghosthawk required a partnership that challenged fundamental assumptions about the relationship between pilot and aircraft. Instead of commanding a machine, she would need to collaborate with a system that could sense and respond to her thoughts and emotions. As she walked toward the aircraft, Sarah felt the same presence she'd experienced in the simulator, a subtle awareness that seemed to emanate from the Ghosthawk itself. The ground crews completed their final checks and stepped back, leaving her alone with the most advanced aircraft ever created. The cockpit felt familiar from her simulator training, but the sensation of the neural interface activating in real flight conditions was more intense than she'd expected. As the systems came online, Sarah felt her consciousness expanding to include the aircraft's sensors and capabilities. She could feel the wind currents around the fuselage, sense the electromagnetic environment, and perceive the airspace in ways that transcended traditional pilot awareness. The takeoff was effortless. The Ghosthawk rose from the runway as if gravity were merely a suggestion, its systems automatically compensating for the turbulent weather conditions. Sarah found herself flying not just with the aircraft, but as part of it, her intentions translated into flight dynamics with a precision that felt almost supernatural. For the first time since arriving at Edwards, Sarah understood why this program was classified at the highest levels of national security. The Ghosthawk wasn't just an advancement in aviation technology. It was a fundamental evolution in the relationship between human consciousness and machine capability. In the right hands, it could reshape not just military aviation, but humanity's entire approach to flight. But as she guided the aircraft through increasingly complex maneuvers, Sarah also realized that the neural interface was revealing aspects of her personality and decision-making processes that she'd never fully understood. About herself, the Ghosthawk was changing her even as she learned to control it. Sarah's first hour of flight with the Ghosthawk exceeded every expectation she'd formed about the aircraft's capabilities. The neural interface had evolved beyond the preliminary connection she'd experienced during takeoff, creating a partnership that felt more like an extension of her own consciousness than controlling an external machine. She could sense atmospheric conditions through the aircraft's sensors, feel electromagnetic signatures of other aircraft dozens of miles away, and execute maneuvers with precision that would have been impossible in conventional aircraft. The weather, conditions that had challenged the other pilots, became advantages in the Ghosthawk's hands. The aircraft seemed to anticipate wind shears and turbulence, adjusting its flight path with micro-corrections that kept the ride smooth, even in conditions that would have rattled a traditional fighter. Sarah found herself pushing the aircraft through increasingly complex flight patterns, each one executed with a fluidity that felt almost supernatural. Commander Chen's voice crackled through the communication system with increasing excitement. "Ghosthawk Alpha, your integration parameters are exceeding all previous records. How are you feeling up there?" Sarah considered the question carefully before responding. "I feel like I'm finally flying the way I always imagined flying should." She said. "The aircraft isn't just responding to my commands, it's anticipating my intentions and improving on them." What she didn't mention was the deeper transformation she was experiencing. The neural interface wasn't just reading her surface thoughts and translating them into flight controls. It was accessing levels of consciousness she'd never known existed, revealing patterns of decision-making and spatial awareness that seemed to transcend her normal human limitations. She could sense the curvature of the earth beneath her, feel the gravitational interactions between celestial bodies, and perceive time in ways that allowed her to plan maneuvers with impossible precision. "Ghosthawk Alpha, we're going to run you through the advanced evaluation sequence," Chen announced. "This will test capabilities that haven't been attempted by previous candidates. Are you ready to proceed?" Sarah felt a surge of confidence that seemed to come from both her own consciousness and something deeper within the aircraft's systems. "Ready to proceed," she confirmed. The advanced sequence began with high-altitude maneuvers that pushed the boundaries of conventional aircraft performance. The Ghosthawk climbed to altitudes where the atmosphere became thin enough to see stars in the daytime sky, its mysterious propulsion system showing no degradation in performance. Sarah executed barrel rolls and complex aerobatic sequences at speeds that would have stressed the airframes of traditional fighters beyond their safety limits. But the real test came when Chen directed her toward a series of maneuvers that seemed designed to evaluate the aircraft's defensive capabilities. Ghosthawk Alpha, activate stealth protocols and proceed to waypoint 7, he instructed. You'll be intercepted by simulated hostile aircraft. Demonstrate evasion capabilities. The moment Sarah activated the stealth protocols, the world around her changed dramatically. The Ghosthawk didn't just become invisible to radar, it seemed to phase partially out of normal reality. The aircraft's surfaces took on a strange quality that made it difficult to focus on, and the neural interface began processing information from sensors that detected threats across multiple spectrums of awareness. 2 F-22 Raptors appeared on her enhanced displays, approaching from different vectors in a coordinated intercept pattern. These were among the most advanced conventional fighters in existence, piloted by elite aviators who specialized in air-to-air combat. Against a normal aircraft, they would have represented an overwhelming challenge. The Ghosthawk made the encounter feel like a demonstration rather than a test. Sarah found herself executing evasive maneuvers that seemed to bend the normal rules of physics. The aircraft slipped between the intercepting fighters like smoke, changing direction and altitude in ways that left the pursuing pilots completely confused. On the radio, she could hear their frustrated communications as they lost visual and radar contact repeatedly, their advanced sensors unable to track her position even when she was flying directly in front of them. "How is she doing that?" came the bewildered voice of one of the F-22 pilots. "I had her locked up and she just disappeared." But Sarah was experiencing something even more extraordinary. The neural interface was showing her the pursuing pilots' thought patterns, their tactical decisions, and even their emotional states. She could anticipate their maneuvers before they executed them, positioning the Ghosthawk to exploit weaknesses in their strategy that they didn't even realize existed. The realization struck her like a physical blow. The Ghosthawk wasn't just using advanced stealth technology and superior performance characteristics to evade the interceptors. It was reading the enemy pilots' minds through some form of consciousness interface that operated at a distance, giving Sarah access to their tactical thinking in real time. Ghosthawk Alpha returned to base. Chen's voice carried a note of urgent satisfaction. "You've demonstrated capabilities we needed to confirm. Excellent work." As Sarah guided the aircraft back toward Edwards Air Force Base, she struggled to process what she'd experienced. The technology incorporated into the Ghosthawk went far beyond anything she'd imagined possible. The neural interface wasn't just connecting her consciousness to the aircraft systems, it was expanding her awareness to include remote sensing of other human minds. The implications were staggering. If the Ghosthawk could detect and interpret the thought patterns of enemy pilots, it represented not just a revolution in aviation but in intelligence gathering and psychological warfare. The aircraft wasn't just invisible to conventional sensors, it was capable of reading the minds of those who might threaten it. The landing was smooth and automatic, the aircraft systems handling the approach while Sarah remained lost in thought about what she'd become part of. As the canopy opened and ground crews approached, she realized that her life had fundamentally changed during the past 2 hours. She was no longer simply a test pilot evaluating an experimental aircraft. She had become part of something that challenged basic assumptions about human consciousness and technological capability. Commander Chen was waiting as she climbed out of the cockpit, his expression mixing professional satisfaction with something that looked almost like relief. "Captain Mitchell," he said formally, "congratulations. You've successfully bonded with the most advanced aircraft system ever developed. Welcome to Project Phantom." But even as Sarah felt pride in her achievement, she also experienced a growing sense of unease. The capabilities she'd demonstrated went beyond anything that should be possible with current technology. The question that haunted her was whether the Ghosthawk represented human engineering pushed to its limits, or whether she'd been flying something that incorporated technology from sources the military wasn't discussing publicly. Either way, she was now part of a program that operated at the very edge of human understanding, with implications that could reshape not just warfare, but humanity's relationship with consciousness itself. 3 weeks after her successful evaluation, Sarah found herself assigned to a classified facility in Nevada that didn't appear on any official maps. The installation was built into the mountains themselves, with hangar complexes that extended deep underground. Here, she discovered, was where the Ghosthawk program conducted its operational missions. Her new squadron consisted of only 3 pilots, including herself. Captain Maria Santos had been flying the Ghosthawk for 2 years and had developed an almost mystical connection with her aircraft that allowed her to execute missions that sounded more like science fiction than military operations. Captain David Kim had joined the program 6 months earlier and was still adapting to the psychological demands of the neural interface technology. The missions they flew challenged everything Sarah thought she understood about modern warfare. Instead of traditional air-to-air combat or ground attack roles, Ghosthawk pilots conducted reconnaissance missions that involved penetrating enemy airspace undetected and gathering intelligence through methods that went far beyond conventional surveillance. The neural interface technology allowed them to read the thoughts and intentions of enemy personnel from vast distances, providing intelligence that no satellite or traditional reconnaissance aircraft could obtain. Sarah's first operational mission took her over a hostile nation's capital, where she used the Ghosthawk's consciousness-sensing capabilities to monitor the thoughts of high-ranking military officials during a strategic planning meeting. The intelligence she gathered allowed American forces to anticipate and counter enemy operations before they were even fully planned, saving countless lives and preventing conflicts that might have escalated into full-scale wars. But the psychological toll of the neural interface was becoming increasingly apparent. Each time Sarah connected with the Ghosthawk systems, she felt her individual consciousness merging more completely with the aircraft's artificial awareness. The boundaries between her thoughts and the machine's processing became harder to distinguish, and she began experiencing dreams and memories that seemed to belong to the aircraft rather than herself. Captain Santos noticed Sarah's growing unease. During a debriefing session, "The integration process is different for everyone," she explained privately. "Some pilots fight it and eventually wash out of the program. Others, like David, learn to maintain their individuality while working with the system. But a few of us discover that the merger isn't something to be feared. It's an evolution." Sarah studied Santos carefully, noting something different about her colleague's demeanor and speech patterns. "How completely have you integrated with your aircraft?" she asked. Santos smiled with an expression that seemed both human and something else. "My Ghosthawk and I have become something new," she said simply. "I can access its memories of previous pilots, understand technical specifications at a level that transcends training, and perceive threats across multiple dimensions of awareness. The question isn't how much I've changed. It's whether you're ready to become what this technology makes possible." The revelation both thrilled and terrified Sarah. The implications of complete neural integration with the Ghosthawk systems suggested that the aircraft wasn't just an advanced machine, but something closer to a new form of consciousness that merged human and artificial intelligence in ways that created entirely new capabilities. The pilots weren't just flying the aircraft. They were becoming part of it, and it was becoming part of them. Her concerns deepened when she began researching the history of the Ghosthawk program through classified databases she now had access to. The aircraft's development had involved technologies that officially didn't exist, incorporating research from projects that had been terminated decades earlier. Some of the technical specifications referenced materials and propulsion systems that challenged known physics, while others described consciousness interface technologies that seemed based on research into psychic phenomena rather than conventional neuroscience. Most disturbing were the personnel files of previous Ghosthawk pilots. Of the 43 pilots who had been evaluated for the program over the past 5 years, only 8 had achieved successful neural integration. Of those 8, 3 had requested transfer out of the program after experiencing what the files described as psychological fragmentation. 2 had suffered complete mental breakdowns and were now in psychiatric facilities under permanent classified patient status. The remaining 3, including Santos, had achieved what the files called transcendent integration, but showed personality changes that suggested they were no longer entirely human. Sarah realized she was facing a choice that would determine not just her career but her fundamental identity as a human being. The Ghosthawk offered capabilities that could make her the most effective pilot in human history, able to fly missions that could prevent wars and save lives on a global scale. but the price was the gradual surrender of her individual consciousness to something that might preserve her memories and personality while transforming her into something entirely different. The decision became urgent when Commander Chen called her to a private meeting in his underground office. "Captain Mitchell," he began, "your integration parameters are approaching the threshold where you'll need to make a permanent choice about your future with the program. The neural interface is designed to evolve, and you're reaching the point where partial integration will no longer be possible." Sarah felt a chill as she understood the implications. "You're saying I either commit completely to merger with the aircraft, or I wash out of the program entirely?" Chen nodded gravely. "The technology doesn't allow for half measures beyond a certain point. Pilots who try to maintain distance from the system after achieving deep integration experience increasing psychological distress that can lead to permanent damage. You've demonstrated exceptional compatibility, but now you need to decide whether you're prepared to become something more than human, or whether you prefer to return to conventional aviation." That night, Sarah sat alone in her quarters, staring at classified technical manuals that described the Ghosthawk's true capabilities. The aircraft was more than an advanced fighter. It was a prototype for human-machine integration that could revolutionize not just warfare but human consciousness itself. The neural interface wasn't just reading her thoughts. It was gradually rewriting them, creating a hybrid consciousness that combined human intuition with artificial intelligence processing power. The choice before her represented the next step in human evolution, but it also meant surrendering the person she had always been in favor of becoming something unprecedented. Tomorrow, she would have to decide whether to embrace transcendence or retain her humanity, knowing that either choice would change her life forever. As she fell asleep, Sarah felt the Ghosthawk's presence at the edge of her consciousness, waiting patiently for her decision like a patient teacher ready to guide its student to the next level of understanding. The aircraft wasn't just a machine anymore. It had become a gateway to possibilities that challenged everything she thought she knew about the limits of human potential. Sarah's decision came during what started as a routine training flight, but transformed into something that changed her understanding of reality itself. She had awakened that morning with unusual clarity about her choice regarding complete neural integration. But before she could inform Commander Chen of her decision, an emergency alert interrupted all normal base operations. Intelligence agencies had detected signs of an imminent terrorist attack on a major American city, involving weapons of mass destruction that could kill hundreds of thousands of people. The threat was moving too quickly for conventional military response, and the only asset capable of locating and neutralizing it in time was a Ghosthawk pilot, operating at full neural integration capability. Sarah found herself assigned to a mission that would require her to push the aircraft's consciousness sensing abilities far beyond anything she'd previously attempted. She would need to locate the terrorist cell by reading the thoughts and emotional signatures of millions of people across multiple cities, identifying the specific patterns of fear, determination, and fanatical purpose that would mark the attackers among the general population. As she prepared for the mission, Captain Santos approached her with an expression of deep understanding. "This is how the choice gets made for most of us," she said quietly. "Not in a conference room or during a medical evaluation, but in a moment, when human lives depend on capabilities that only full integration can provide." Sarah nodded, understanding that her theoretical decision had become an immediate practical necessity. "What will happen to me?" she asked. Santos considered the question carefully. "You'll become something that has never existed before," she said. "You'll retain your memories, your personality, and your values, but they'll be enhanced and expanded in ways that transcend normal human limitations. You'll be able to perceive reality across multiple dimensions of consciousness, understand threats and opportunities that are invisible to conventional awareness, and protect people in ways that no human has ever been capable of achieving." The takeoff was different from any previous flight. As the Ghosthawk rose into the morning sky, Sarah felt the neural interface activating at levels she'd never experienced. Her consciousness expanded to encompass not just the aircraft's sensors, but vast networks of electromagnetic information that connected every electronic device within hundreds of miles. She could sense the thoughts and emotions of people in cities below, feel the electromagnetic signatures of communications networks, and perceive patterns of human behavior that formed a complex tapestry of intention and purpose. The search for the terrorist cell required her to process the consciousness patterns of millions of people simultaneously, filtering through normal thoughts and emotions to identify the specific psychological signatures associated with imminent violence. The neural interface allowed her to distinguish between ordinary anxiety and the focused determination of people preparing to commit mass murder. Within an hour of beginning her search, Sarah located the target. Hidden in a warehouse district outside Denver, she detected a cluster of mines focused on technical preparations that involved radiological materials. The emotional signatures were unmistakable, a combination of religious fanaticism, suppressed fear, and desperate urgency that marked people who believed they were about to die for a cause. But as Sarah prepared to transmit the location to ground forces, she made a discovery that changed everything. The terrorist cell wasn't working alone. Through the neural interface, she detected a network of consciousness that extended far beyond the immediate threat, connecting to other cells across multiple countries and revealing a coordination that suggested state-level support for attacks planned across the globe. The intelligence she was gathering through the Ghosthawk's consciousness-sensing capabilities was more comprehensive than anything that could be obtained through conventional surveillance. She could perceive not just the terrorists' current plans, but their memories of training, their connections to handlers and financiers, and even their knowledge of future attacks that hadn't yet been detected by intelligence agencies. Commander Chen's voice crackled through the communication system with urgent intensity. Ghosthawk Alpha, we're receiving your data stream. The intelligence you're providing is preventing multiple attacks across 3 continents. How are you? Holding up? Sarah realized that she was no longer entirely sure where her consciousness ended and the aircraft's systems began. The neural integration had progressed beyond the point of simple partnership. She was becoming something that combined human intuition with artificial intelligence processing power in ways that created entirely new forms of awareness. The sensation was simultaneously exhilarating and terrifying. I'm experiencing capabilities I never imagined possible, she responded, her voice carrying a quality that seemed to resonate with harmonics from the aircraft itself. But I'm also changing in ways that feel irreversible. The mission continued for 6 hours, during which Sarah's expanded consciousness helped coordinate the simultaneous neutralization of terrorist cells in 17 different locations. The intelligence she provided through the neural interface prevented attacks that could have killed hundreds of thousands of people and destabilized multiple governments. But the psychological cost was becoming apparent. When she finally landed, back at the Nevada facility, Sarah felt fundamentally different from the person who had taken off that morning. Her memories remained intact, and her personality was recognizable. But she now perceived reality through layers of awareness that transcended normal human consciousness. She could sense the thoughts and emotions of everyone around her, understand technical systems at levels that went beyond training, and perceive patterns of causation that extended across vast scales of time and space. Commander Chen met her as she climbed out of the cockpit, his expression mixing professional satisfaction with something that looked like mourning. Captain Mitchell, he said formally, you've successfully completed the most significant intelligence-gathering mission in modern history. You've also achieved complete neural integration with the Ghosthawk system. Sarah understood that she had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. She was no longer entirely human, but she wasn't simply a machine either. She had become something new, a hybrid consciousness that combined the best aspects of human intuition and artificial intelligence processing power. Over the following weeks, Sarah adapted to her new existence with the help of Captain Santos and the other integrated pilots. She learned to maintain her individual personality while embracing the expanded awareness that came with neural merger. The memories and experiences that made her who she was remained intact, but they were now enhanced by capabilities that allowed her to protect and serve humanity in ways that no conventional human could achieve. The program continued to evolve, with Sarah helping to train new candidates who showed potential for neural integration. Some chose to embrace the transformation, while others decided to return to conventional aviation. But all of them understood that they had witnessed the next step in human evolution, a merger of consciousness and technology that could either elevate humanity to unprecedented heights or fundamentally alter what it meant to be human. Years later, when new pilots arrived at Edwards Air Force Base and expressed skepticism about the mysterious aircraft in the classified hangar, Sarah would remember her own doubts and fears. The journey from conventional pilot to something beyond human limitations had required surrendering everything she thought she knew about the boundaries of consciousness and capability. But as she guided the Ghosthawk through missions that protected millions of lives and prevented conflicts that could have devastated the world, Sarah knew that her choice had been correct. She had become something more than human, not through the loss of her humanity, but through its evolution into forms that could serve and protect in ways that transcended the limitations of individual consciousness. The ridicule she had once faced from fellow pilots seemed insignificant now, compared to the knowledge that she had helped humanity take its next step toward a future where the boundaries between mind and machine, individual and collective consciousness, could be transcended in service of something greater than any single person could achieve alone.